Good morning, everyone. Could I call the meeting to order? Good morning. I'm Bob Brown. I'm the monitoring officer, new monitoring officer for the West of England Combined Authority. Can I welcome you to the first overview and scrutiny of this municipal year? It falls to me to introduce this particular committee and deal with the elections of chair. But before I start, I've got some housekeeping. Unfortunately, we are not quorate because there are not 2/3 of the membership in the meeting. We will proceed on a informal basis to hear all the items of today's meeting and elect a chair. But in terms of electing the chair, that will need to be confirmed by a quorate meeting in due course. So if members are happy to proceed on that basis, then we will proceed on that basis. If I can.
Sorry, just check. Is that there? I mean, I can see the little name tags next to you, acting chair. Have they sent their apologies so we know they're definitely not coming, or will they maybe be arriving later?
They may be arriving later. We will deal with apologies in due course.
Okay, thank you.
So if I can start with just the fire notices. In the event of fire, please await direction of the West of England Combined Authority staff, who will help you assist with the evacuation. Please do not return to the building until instructed to do so by fire wardens. May I also remind you that the meeting will be recorded as allowed for in law. Therefore, you will need to use your microphones when addressing the committee. Once you've finished speaking, please press the middle button. This will prevent background noise from being recorded and broadcast. Can I call for apologies, if there are any apologies?
We have apologies from the Metro Mayor, Dan Norris.
No other apologies. In which case, if I can move on to the election of a chair for the municipal year. Do we have any nominations?
Yes, Councillor Jerome Thomas. I'd like to propose Councillor Alison Stretfield James.
Is there a seconder?
Yeah. Thank you. Hello, I'm Councillor Lucy Hodge. I'm delighted to second the nomination of Councillor Stretfield Jones to the role of chair. Alison is known to me as a fellow Baines councillor, and I'm confident that with her range of competencies and professional experience, she'll be an excellent chair.
Thank you. Members, be pleased to note that we are now quorate. Are there any further nominees? No. In which case, can I have a show of hands to the proposal? That's carried. Thank you, Councillor Stretfield.
Well, can I just say to the assembled committee, thank you very much indeed for your vote of confidence, and I hope I justify your expectations. You can let me know as the year goes on, so thank you very much indeed. Does this mean that the chairing of the meeting now passes to me immediately?
Immediately.
Excellent. On that basis, the next agenda item is to elect a vice chair for this year, and I would like to nominate Councillor Jerome Thomas for this role. Do we have any seconders? Mark Weston.
We can make a cross-party chair. I'm more than happy to second Jerome with that one.
I'm very grateful. Thank you very much. Are there any other nominations for the position of vice chair? No. Can I please have a show of hands in support of Councillor Thomas? So that is passed unanimously. Thank you very much indeed. Congratulations, Councillor Thomas. Excellent. So we now have a quorate committee and a chair and a vice chair. So I feel we're making absolutely splendid progress. So could I just ask, as everyone is aware that there are a lot of new faces around the table for this meeting, as I'm going to be calling out your names more than anyone else, could you tilt your name so that I make sure I do get those right? That's very kind. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Excellent. So moving on, the next item on the agenda is minutes of the previous meeting. And the minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of March 2004 are attached and have been circulated. And the question is whether the committee is contented to agree the minutes as a correct record. Now, I have issues with these minutes as a correct record in relation to some of the question and answer, part of the question and answer session. So I have asked that these be re-looked at and that we bring these minutes back to the next meeting to approve them on that occasion after I've looked at the aspects of them that I was not happy in relation to the question and answer session. Are there any other aspects of those minutes that anyone wants to be looked at as part of that process? No, in that case, I defer those minutes, the approval of those minutes to the next meeting, and I will liaise with the officers in relation to the aspect that I felt was not as accurate as it could have been. Moving on to the next agenda item, which is item 5, declarations of interest under the Localism Act. Do any of the members present have any interests to declare on any items of business? While you're thinking about that, I'm just going to get my document here. So no declarations of interests recorded. That could be noted. Thank you very much indeed. Moving on now, item 6, chair's announcements. Firstly, I would like to welcome our newly formed committee. I think there are only 4 of us, 3 of whom are present, who were actually part of the committee as formed last year. Some of us were new to that committee last year. We have, I gather, members who have been on it before, so have historic experience, which we'll be looking forward to drawing on in the form of Mark Weston. Yeah, well, don't you worry, we'll be drawn on as and when it's helpful to do so. So welcome to everybody, and I know it's a very different committee from the ones that you're sort of familiar with on your own councils, and I'm intending to propose a proper induction and training programme so that we all are fully aware of what we're supposed to be doing, how we can do it, and how we can be as effective as possible as an overview and scrutiny committee. But more of that later on our last item. So that's the first thing. I'd also like to welcome Stephen Peacock, our new permanent CEO of WECA. Welcome. It's wonderful to have, we now have and also Bob Brown, sorry, Bob, we're all new to a position of monitoring officer. It's excellent that we now have with Rachel a full panoply of permanent officers at the head of WECA through a proper selection process. So we are delighted to see you here and looking forward to a bright new future with you 3 in charge, and overview and scrutiny. We'll very much look forward to working with you as we move forward. The only other chair announcement that I wanted to raise was that up to now, it's been the customary for the Metro Mayor to attend overview and scrutiny in order to answer question and answer sessions. Now, he's given his apologies today, but I would like to ask whether or not he is intending that the Mayor hereafter will be attending these meetings. I think it's a very important part of the democratic process that he does. I don't know whether there is as it were, a constitutional obligation on him to do so, but I would have thought from the point of view of scrutiny, good governance and transparency, it is important that he does attend these meetings. So we accept his apologies on this occasion, of course. We do hope this won't be a matter of principle, that he will be intending to attend future overview and scrutiny committee meetings. Does anyone have any comments on that or responses from the officers? I'm just assuming there's no decision that he won't attend or anything of that sort.
No, we're not aware of any decision of that nature, Chair. And as I understand it, the Mayor was a regular attender of previous overview and scrutiny. So I think that's the present position.
He was indeed, and I think we will proceed on the basis that we will be seeing him regularly hereafter, unless we hear otherwise. So that is excellent. So those are all my announcements. Does anyone have any questions before I move on to the next item? No. So if we move on to item 7, which is items from the public. There were 2 questions submitted by members of the public, and written responses have been provided, and they are available on the website and have been circulated to members of the committee. So everyone is, well, I'm sure, have read and absorbed those. And we've had one statement from David Redwell, who is here today. Having submitted a statement, he is entitled to address the committee for up to 3 minutes. David Redwell is a very highly well-informed regular attendee of these meetings, and he knows the rules and always has something interesting to say. So, David, are you intending to give an oral statement today for your 3-minute slot? Excellent. Please proceed. 3 minutes is starting.
David Redwell, representing various passenger groups, but also your passenger rep on the bus advisory panel for Wecker and North Somerset, but also on the similarly on Somerset County Council and Gloucestershire for the record. So I am concerned. First point is, can I say thank you for all the work that went into saving the bus routes by Transfora, which collapsed on the Friday. I know the team put a lot of efforts in there. We've still got one route really needs picking up. That's the 90 through South Bristol. We need to find an operator for that, and there's not one planned for September. The other thing is the Harbour Festival this weekend on tourism. I flagged this because we've got the Balloon Fiesta coming. There was no passenger information out there about alternative bus stops and where the buses were going from. There's a programme provided by Bristol City Council, where they paid for, but no public transport information on a little bit by First Great Western Road, which they paid for. Can we look at that and how we handle tourism? It's our economy. This is the Tourism Authority, Western Combined Authority. On the issue of the mayor, can we just make sure that we have representatives from Wecker on the Western Gateway Transport Board? There isn't one at the moment. The board met, there was no Wecker rep, and the mayor should also have a rep on the joint committee. And the issue of that is that North Somerset Council needs to be joining as part of the devolution debate that's now in the House. It's a bill, along with the railways bill, the buses bill, and a bill for HS2 in the north. So we need to be looking at devolution. Otherwise, we'll be at the end of the branch line in the West Country, not at the beginning of it, the journey with North Somerset becoming a full member. It's crazy not to have the airport and not to have the seaport in the same authority. On buses, the 8485, we saw 200 protesters walking out of Wootton-under-Edge and the villages covered by this authority. 3 MPs on the 8485. That is a bus that links Wootton-under-Edge to Yate, is absolutely an economic driver. There is West Locals. We want to have a look at all those West Local bids because half of them haven't gone through public consultation and community consultation. I know that now. And there's a quango called West of England Rural Network, whoever they are. They certainly don't speak to people, but you give them award and things. The issue of that is the Hawkesbury-Upton bus is not something that we've requested. It's a West Local and it goes to Hawkesbury-Upton every 2 hours. It's not replaced with the 8485. Gloucester County Council have asked you formally, as has the MPs, and the Labour MP, Symington 2 Liberals, have also asked you to retain the 8485, okay, between Wootton-under-Edge and Yate. So we need to make sure there's discussions urgently. That bus will come off the road in September if we don't sort it. And people want me to get to school work or to hospital appointments and Wootton, as I said. On rail, we need to pick up Metro West and keep pushing with it. Yate Station needs sorting out shelters and things, but we need to make progress on the Portishead line and make progress on the Henbury Loop and Henbury Station. So it's good work to go forward, but remember this organisation is still in special measures and we need to make sure it performs for passengers. Everything it should do should be about passengers, people and communities, not about Quango land. It's about the people out there who use the public transport network you provide. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Almost completely within your 3 minutes. And we know that you could speak for at least 3 hours on the subject without a note. So we are grateful that you are compact into the 3 minute. Your points are noted and have been heard. Thank you very much indeed for that. There are no further items from the public. So I would like to move on to item 8, which is the terms of reference. And this committee is invited to note the terms of reference as they appear in the Constitution. Now, there was an informal meeting in June, which all members were invited to, where this subject was gone into in more detail as a sort of induction and initial training. I know many of us who are here today attended that, so I don't intend to go through these at the moment. We've already done that in our informal meeting, and we can do it again when we do further induction and training as we go forward. So they're here to be noted. Does anyone have any questions or anything they would like to say about this item? No, thank you very much indeed. So then we move on to our last 2 items, if you like, which are the main body of work for us to address today. The final item will be our work programme, which I want to make sure we have time to discuss at the end of this meeting. But if you like, the penultimate item is the review of items to be considered by the West of England Combined Authority Committee and Joint Committee on the 26th of July, which is this Friday. Now, every meeting at our formal meetings will comprise the main part of our work, if you like. And members will already now be aware that what has always happened and continues to happen, despite protests during the last year, is that we the committee, get the papers for these committees on a Thursday evening for a meeting on Monday morning, which gives us one working day to look at them, and obviously the weekend for those of us who are so inclined, as I'm sure many of us end up doing. Now, we have asked a number of times last year to have earlier notice of these papers, because actually these are reasonably light in papers this time. There's all 350-ish for one committee and 40-ish for the other committee, but they can be hundreds and hundreds of pages. And one of the points I want to discuss when we look at our work programme is how we as a committee can spread the workload between us and become better informed, so that we are better equipped to understand and address these papers when we get them. But even on that basis, getting the papers with one working day's notice is hopelessly unsatisfactory in my view. And so I do put out another request to our worker officers to see whether or not anything can be done, Stephen, to give us more time to look at these matters. I understand there are timetables within the officers' timetable as well, and there are difficulties. But as we have many new members, at least one of whom has expressed some distress at the idea that this is going to happen every meeting, could we ask you to respond to this and see whether anything can be done, and if not, why not?
One of the things we're going to be doing, Bob and I knew, obviously, is to take stock after this meeting. So that will be one of the things we bring back. Clearly, we do have a dispatch date protocol before the committee itself. So we need to understand what consequences would be of changing anything. As you say, with only one meeting every 3 months, there's an awful lot that's builds up, shall we say. So the packs are a mighty bundle. So we understand the challenge, and we'll take it away, Bob and I. Thank you.
I'm very grateful. Does anybody else want to say anything about that particular matter before we move on to the papers? No. Well, you'll have seen there's some quite big items that are going to be decided by the Joint Committee and the Combined Committee on Friday. And because we had a number of new members here, and because we'd had discussions before this meeting about the possibility of me taking the chair, I had liaised with the officers with a view to having the relevant officers on the two big subject matters, which I'll address in a moment, to be here to give us an overview and a summary of the position of where they are, so that we can get a bit of an introduction, and then I will invite members to ask any questions that they would like to ask. And it seemed to me, given my experience of being vice chair of this committee last year, the two really big items, and the officers I've asked to be here, are the transport section, because there's some big decisions coming up within the transport section, and also the transformation programme and the response to the best value notice, which is the constitutional reform and how WEC is going to respond to the best value notice, etc. So I have asked whether the officers who are in charge of those particular areas or are closely involved with those could attend today to give us, as I say, an overview and a description of what's happening, where we are, and take questions based on their address and also on the papers that have been circulated to us last week. So are those officers present? And in which case, perhaps we could start with transport. And thank you very much for coming. Toby.
Chair, I just wonder, since many of us are new, if you could just quickly outline how this section of the agenda is normally structured, sort of how it normally plays out, just so we can understand when and where to ask our questions and make our points. Thank you.
So there's nothing normal about how, so we can decide how we want to do it going forward. But sometimes officers do come and make a presentation. Quite often they don't, and we just have the papers before us. But they would usually be available within the body of the hall, if you like, to attend to answer questions. So unless we have a presentation, then you'd be expected, if you want to be effective, to have read the papers, understood what's in them, and decide what you want to scrutinise in your role as a scrutiny member of the Scrutiny Committee. And so there are different ways that we can do this. As it has been put to me, option A is that I go through all the items and say, do you want to do any questions about this? But that could take quite a long time in itself with everyone saying no. So on this occasion, where everyone's new, I've chosen the two big subjects that we can focus on, but there will be opportunity for people to ask questions on anything else if they want to do so. I suggest that we hear the addresses, ask any questions, and then I've certainly got some detailed questions, unless they're addressed by our officers here, that I'd like to point to within the papers. Are the papers for that joint committee and combined committee in the room, as it were? So if we do need to refer to them, we can do so. I mean, I've got them on my laptop. Does everybody have them with them? Yes. Okay, good. Right. So, gentlemen, would you like to introduce yourselves and tell us what you're going to give us an overview about?
Good morning, Chair. Morning, committee members. My name's Malcolm Parsons. I'm an Interim Delivery Director for Transport Infrastructure within the Combined Authority.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members. My name's Chris Salmon. I'm the Head of Infrastructure Directorate Planning, and here on behalf of David Gibson, who's on his way to Bristol and may well join partway through the committee, but here.
Chair, if I may, I'll give an overview of 4 points, then Chris will fill in on some others. So I'll run through CRSTS as it's shown in the paper, M32, which forms part of that programme, Bath to Bristol Strategic Corridor, which also forms part of that programme, and an IMS revenue share. I'll start
as a preliminary matter. I'm sorry to interrupt you already. I know it's very rude, but as there are so many new members and there are always members of the public here, if the first time you introduce, rather than using the acronyms, because I know you live with this stuff every day, you know exactly what CRSTS is. I nearly was going to look that up, and when I was looking at the papers, I was going right back to the beginning. And, you know, and again, it'd be really helpful to have an acronym sort of table. But if in these public meetings you could explain what those are for, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
With pleasure, Chair. Thank you. CRSTS, City Regional Sustainable Travel Settlement, a fund from government which was awarded to combined authorities across the UK, started in 2022, April 22. Completes in March 2027. The fund awarded to the West of England Combined Authority was made up of £540 million from government, with match funding of £86 million from local contributions within the unitary authorities, giving us a total fund of £616 million. An element of that, £150 million, has been spent on maintenance, which is passported, effectively passed through the combined authority straight to the unitary authorities to be spent on maintenance activities of the highway and transport infrastructure. The other remaining funds were made up of a set of projects, 20 in total, across the region, of which some remain with the combined authority for delivery, two specifically, the remainders sit with the unitary authorities for delivery. Today, I'm going to discuss a few elements within the overall programme, which talks about over-programming, which is a list of projects which have been asked by government for, in addition to the original 616 million. The original ask from government was to create a list of projects of 10% of the value of the original fund, so £54 million. That was proposed back in 2022 as part of the bid to government and has been published on the Department for Transport's website since that time. As of the start of this year, the Department for Transport asked us to increase the value of the over-programming list to 25% of the fund, so from 56 million to 135 million pounds worth of projects within the list for delivery within this CRSTS period, so that's up to March 2027. We have a list in the committee paper which sets out some of those projects which will form the over-programming list, which is proposed to go back to Department for Transport for approval later on after committee. There are projects within that which are specific to the region, and there's an overall ask which is around active travel and a maintenance fund. Those projects are prioritised through what is called the MCAF, which is a multi-assessment framework for transport schemes within the region, and it provides a score for each one of those projects, so its viability for regional purposes. In addition to that assessment, we look at the ability for us as a region to deliver those projects between now and March 2027 when the fund runs out. So the committee paper looks at those elements as well and how it's done. Within the paper, we initially talk about the value of the programming list and then moving on to a requirement to increase the contingency that's being held by the programme, which at October 2023 when committee saw a review of the rebaseline of that programme, saw the programme itself holding less than 1%. So it held £4.96 million in risk and contingency, which is less than 1% of the 616 million. And the ask at this committee is to increase that contingency up to a regional standard norm of about 4%. So moving to 21.6 million. So that's really the base position of the OVE programme and contingency. The paper then moves into talking about resource. There is a top slice fund that was taken from the top of the programme and asked committee members to enable the allocation of £3.6 million delegated to the Director of Infrastructure in conjunction with its union authority infrastructure directors to allocate that money to the unitaries for project resources. Those are resources which will work over and above the individual projects. Officers that work on projects in itself can be capitalised to the project itself, but where they're working at a programme level, then there's no allocation available. So this is money to provide resources within each unitary authority to enable programme management and functionality. And finally, within that area, we talk about how we can support timely decision making. So there's a clarity of a delegation that was provided by committee in June 22, and it seeks to just clarify that delegation. So this is approval of projects up to and including £8 million or there below, and within the CRSTS programme at final business case for delivery. So it seeks to move that delegation to directors for timely and critical decision making. So I will pause there, Chair, if I may, for questions on the first recommendation from the paper.
Ben. Thank you for that. Could you provide some clarity on how the over-programming is actually operating? So are the government asking us as a unitary authority to over-program, and therefore we've got alternative projects we can bring into scope if we're underspending elsewhere? Or is this over-programming being held at a government level, so the government will decide what things they want to turn on and off across all the unitary authorities?
Thank you, Councillor. The answer is quite simply the first point. We have been asked by the Department for Transport to increase that list. It's a list of projects which we may draw on as a region to deliver if funds become available within our own CRSTS programme.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ben. Mark.
Mine's going to be one of those classically stupid questions, but since I'm new, I'm going to ask it. What's the Yates Spur? I'm afraid I genuinely don't know, and it's throughout the document.
Thank you, Councillor. Yates Spur is an active travel scheme which is currently within our infrastructure fund, the IF funds it's known as, and that's been reclassified into the CRSTS fund. So it's just an active travel scheme. It's for cycling, walking and wheeling.
The last bit I needed. The second question. When it comes to our councils, we traditionally hold reserves contingency funds and running at about 5% mark. So 4 seems to still be on the lighter end, particularly considering inflationary pressures in the construction sector and everything else. Is the 4% genuinely going to be enough?
Thank you, Councillor. It's a golden question. There are contingency and risk pots at each project level as well. So this is a programme level contingency. Each project gets its own risk and contingency pot, roughly around 5 to 6%. Inflation has been a challenge in this programme since 2022. We rebaselined the programme in October 23 with that in mind. Recognise very early that £85 million worth of inflation was likely to occur within the programme, and we reworked the numbers to make that work. This is an opportunity to ensure that we've got risk and contingency held at programme level where projects run out of their own contingency, but there's a decision to continue with that project, or there is additional scope required, or there's changing requirements from government which needs to be met.
Thank you.
Toby.
Thank you for the introduction. So we know that the delivery of this programme is incredibly challenging. I think it's something like 87% of the 540 million is being spent in the last 3 years of the 5-year programme, and I imagine a lot of that will squeeze up into the last 2 years and the last one year as well. So the profile is very challenging. The over-programming schemes, if I understand it, are there to fill in if there's any if any of the larger schemes aren't deliverable within that time frame. Given the challenges of preparing and delivering the larger schemes, how are we actually going to be able to deliver those over-programmed schemes which won't have been developed even by the time we get towards the latter years of the programme.
Thank you, Councillor. A few points of clarity, I think, within that. So money for the programme scheme may come from projects as they move through the development of their life cycle. They have an allocation at the start. Over time, it would be a beautiful world if those numbers came down. In the case of recommendations further in this paper, actually, for the Bath to Bristol Strategic Corridor, that's exactly what's happened. Had a high allocation, it's gone through its outline business case. The revised number has actually dropped. So that gives us some money in the programme to go and reallocate elsewhere. You're absolutely right. These are challenging times. If you were at audit committee last week or heard or watched the audit committee last week, you've seen some more detail on the numbers within the 3 years that remains. The projects that are coming into the O programme list, part of the due diligence and the governance we're putting into that is whether they are deliverable in that time frame. They're fairly simplistic schemes. A lot of them are already within pipelines in the unitary authorities. They're dusting off the design and then move those through to delivery.
Okay, thank you. That's clear. The second question for me, if that's okay. I've forgotten what it was. Oh yes, on the officer delegation, I think it's actually an increase. So it's a clarification of the previous rules and an increase from 6 million to 8 million. So just to have that noted by the committee. Normally, in principle, I would prefer to have as many decisions as possible happening in public view. In this case, with transport schemes, I'm perhaps slightly less concerned because I think most of these schemes tend to go through the unitary authority committees for approval. At least they do in Bristol. I'm not sure about the other authorities. So they kind of, it's almost duplicitous coming to WECA as well. But what level of reporting will be done on those decisions, and just not to add to the project's risk by forcing the decision to come to committee, but how will those decisions be reported at committee so that, for example, the brakes can be put on if it really is thought that the wrong decision has been made through an officer delegation? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. I think there's two elements. I might ask for our monitoring officer to come in on one of those points. But on the first point, the projects we're talking about in that delegation are invariably delivered by unitary authorities. You're absolutely right. We've gone through their own governance process and their own committee processes for rise at the combined authority for a decision. So that is one of our governance checkpoints and assurance. As for decisions that are made by the combined authority, they are published decisions that are within our website and therefore on the public domain. Questions can be challenged on that. There's 28 days cooling off period within that, unless our monitoring officer would like to add any further information.
Chair, if I may. Yep. So the normal process for key decisions of this value onto the forward plans, you get an opportunity to see them coming, and then you've got some abilities to scrutinise, and then there's a 5-day post decision call-in period.
You are referring, however, to things that may be therefore delegated, because there won't be something that needs to come formally to a committee decision, and in that instance we will typically publish those. As a new person, I know how it's done in Bristol, but I need to check with colleagues as to how exactly we do that here. So you colleagues may be familiar with the concepts of an officer of executive decision, which is either used for recording stuff that's below the officer delegation or where there is a delegation provided by a committee. So we'll come back to you on the precise answer here. It's a form of that, though. There would be a published notice to say this decision's been taken within a delegation from the committee.
And this, of course, is an important point, because we had a whole issue during the last year of the committee where there was an issue that one of the Baines councillors wanted to call in, but it was decided by the then monitoring officer that hadn't been a decision which could be called in. So the timing and nature of the decisions, whether or not they qualify to be called in or not, is critically important when controversial decisions are being made. So that is an important point. Does anyone want to ask any more? So Jim, one moment, because Lucy asked first and then it will be. Does anything on that particular matter there before we move on to Lucy's question? Because it's an important area. No, thank you. Lucy.
Yes, hello. I've just got a straightforward question about the over-programming list. The to follow items on there that are more big bundles. What's the deadline for? Have the schemes within that already been decided, or are those to follow items quite fluid still? Is there time for unitary authorities to contribute more programmes to those? That's my first question.
Thank you, Councillor. Indeed, they are invariably maintenance and active travel projects, small scale projects, small value projects. And we've been asking the unitary authorities to bring those forward as and when there's an ask, particularly if we've got remaining funds. The entire intention of the O programming list, of course, is not to give money back to government. That is as simple as it gets. So we are creating a list of quick, responsive schemes.
Okay, lovely. And then the other question I had, unrelated, the drawdown of the 4.5 million for 4.9 million for the BBSC, the business cases. How will the unitary authorities be involved in that process of the evolving business cases?
Thank you, Councillor. I haven't actually got the BBSC on my list yet, but we will. So the BAF, the Bristol Strategic Corridor Scheme, went through committee in October, which approved its business case. And today, this committee paper is seeking a drawdown of funding to move itself through to the final business case.
Thank you, Lucy. Jerome.
Thank you, Mark. So I didn't hear your job title at the start.
Interim Delivery Director within Transport.
Okay, thank you. I'm curious on the actual delivery side, because when we were talking about project management discipline, we were mainly talking about timely decision making. But we've got a challenge both with, I mean, you talked about a proportion of projects that are being dealt with, delivered at the combined authority level, and then projects that are being delivered at the local authority level. What's the approach to our overall improvement on project management in terms of making sure that we can deliver projects as best we can on time and on budget? Because I think it's, that is one of the things that's at the heart of why we need over-programming in the first place, because if we're able to deal with the root cause upstream, it makes us less likely to have to, increase the amount of over-programming. So I suppose it's, I think that's a question for you as well, Stephen. How do we get that really good project management discipline in place?
Thank you, Councillor. I think that's a golden question, actually. It's a really interesting space that we're working. We've been working with our unitary authority partners, providing upskilling in cost management, schedule management. We're improving our programme management office here in the combined authority, and we're seeking greater transparency for information and data consistency with our colleagues in unitary authorities. We are providing funds to enable more resources at programme management level. We are sharing learnings that we are taking from each project. Of course, you should do a lessons learned at the end of each project and each stage of project, move those forwards. We share those across the entire region as part of the MCA's accountability in that space. There is a constant need to challenge, improve and progress. It is a very complicated process because we have the political dynamics, we have regional dynamics, we have central government dynamics, as well as delivering projects. I'm not going to suggest these are simple, nor should they be. But there is a constant changing dynamic there, and our new chief exec has a very strong view of delivery. He may wish to step in.
Well, only to say it's not just a problem here. I mean, having come from Bristol, these are difficult things to get right. And to give a bit of context, Bristol's journey to get to anywhere near its estimate of what it thought it could deliver by way of capital spend, if you measure it that way, is that I think we've moved up from something like delivering half of what we said we were going to do at the start of the year when I started there, to about 2/3 now. So small gains, but not nearly enough. There is clearly in our organisation another factor, which is this is all coming at us very quickly. From about 3 or 4 years ago, where the numbers were much smaller in terms of the scale of our delivery, and I think I recall seeing a figure of somewhere in the region of 60 million as our best year yet. If you, as you say, if you look at years 4 and 5 of CRSTS, you see the challenge. The added complication, of course, being, as you've just heard, the hybrid model, where we do some things ourselves and other things are delivered through the UAs. So suffice to say, this is one of our defining challenges. The kind of collective optimism that bedevils these programs, where people go, well, I think I can get that one away just about, and you multiply those assumptions up 100-fold, and you end up with something that inevitably is going to need over programming because it looks like it's 30% over egged. That to me is almost, you have to accept that that's the truth to start with. Whilst whittling away at that problem, you also need to put more things into the top of the machine, i.e. more projects. I would say, you know, were to make one observation, it took us all a long time to move from 10% to 25% optimism bias or over programming. And I know there was some additional, you know, over programming that was already in there, but let's be honest, 10% was always going to be a stretch. I think we might want to even go further. And what I've said to the team is, I don't want to hear perfectly good serviceable projects that have the potential to deliver to the what's that M thing, the acronym, the
multi-assessment framework.
That, because they all have to deliver that. You know, they have to be good projects with good value for money. But we're surely not short of good transport projects, good sustainable transport projects. So we shouldn't be turning anything away at this point. We need the hopper full up because the region has an infrastructure and transport deficit. So our problem shouldn't be a lack of good projects. So we will push really hard on this, every angle, including talking to government about it, ensuring that we aren't seemingly the worst in the pack. And what I gather, because I've asked the question, is that the challenges we face, unsurprisingly, are being faced everywhere. So there's an important point here about looking at this through every lens. Are these the best projects? Are we the best organisation we can be? Have we got the right delivery model, considering we have some delivery in different organisations? Really hard to, shall we say, shake a stick at organisations where you don't have line management responsibility for people. So how do you really pull all the levers? And then how do we look nationally? Are we doing the right thing by our region? Are we in the lead or in the pack? All these things have to be done at once.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing is that in, you know, strategy language, this is a must-win battle, which we're not quite seeing reflected in the documentation that we're getting. You know, I don't know who these key partners are who are helping us in this must-win battle, but that's for future meetings, and it'll no doubt be a theme that we keep coming back to. And picking up your point about the hopper, we need to make sure that not a load of rubbish is getting thrown into the hopper at the top. So we also need that focus on how is it that we're making sure that these projects that are coming through are linked very much to our overarching transport goals. And again, you know, that we'll be coming back to that repeatedly as well. Thank you.
Toby, if there's something selectively on that, otherwise I was going to suggest that we allow Malcolm and Chris to finish their presentation, or is your question to emerge out of the conversation we've just been having?
It's along the same theme. I'd just like to ask for a comment on one specific project in terms of deliverability. We've already seen later in the papers that one of the big projects, the M32 scheme, is being pushed into the next phase of CRSTS. The Bristol to Bath strategic corridor is a £125 million project, and it's currently scheduled to have a build phase of 18 months, and it's across 2 councils, and it's a large, very, very large geographical delivery area. Do we truly believe that we can deliver that project on site in 18 months? Or are we, you know, sort of, to be frank, are we kidding ourselves? Are we over optimistic?
No, we're not over optimistic. That scheme's come down. That's one of the schemes that's in this paper. It's dropped down to about 86 million. Of that, we have split the Bristol section, of those who know well the geographics of the A4, so Emery Road, McDonald's, as people like to call it, all the way into Bristol city centre. That has been split between short-term and long-term opportunities. Short-term is principally around active travel schemes and bus prioritisation measures on the existing bus network, so the existing bus lanes. The other end from towards Bath, much more ambitious, but nonetheless deliverable. The infrastructure schemes there can be split projects along the route, which gives us opportunity to divide up that along that network. The challenge would be, rather than delivery of that scheme, would be disruption to the network, the road network, and how we move people around, whether that's on sustainable transport or other means while we're doing those works. And that is a piece of work my team are rapidly doing, not just for ourselves, but with the unitary authorities, because this is about the transport network across the region. It's not about Thank you, Councillor. I'm absolutely confident that we will get that scheme delivered, because actually it's not that complicated. It's quite simple.
Okay, I admire your confidence. Thank you.
So unless there are any other burning questions arising out of those discussions, could I invite Malcolm to complete his presentation and with Chris?
Thank you, Chair. As the other points in the paper, we have discussed, of course, the M32. So that is a project which sought to put a park and ride scheme at Junction 1 on the M32. But as we saw in a previous paper that came to committee, the value for money on that scheme was not very high. And the solution from the project team and members that we've spoken to, both in Bristol and South Gloucestershire and Bath and North East Somerset, was to change the scope of that scheme to seek to avoid the damaging impacts of measures that would have been on the M32. So effectively, you reduce the capacity of the M32 to move people into a park and ride scheme, but in reality, the satellite navigation systems in people's cars just means that you go and find another route. And our transport analysis and modelling showed that vehicles were finding their way through French A and fish ponds and other routes, which led to poor air quality in those areas and reduction in bus capacity through those areas because the vehicles were getting snarled up with buses. So we've taken back that as a solution and looking at a wider solution to be able to intercept private vehicles and bring them off the network before they getting towards the M32 or trying to rat run through some of our more suburban residential areas. So that's the progress on that project. The committee paper seeks to change the milestone to March 2025 for a revised outline business case and clarifies its allocation for funding. The next one on the list, as I discussed, is Bath to Bristol Strategic Corridor. That went through March committee. The paper seeks to clarify the drawdown for final business case for all elements of that scheme to get that through to the next proposed committee, which will be autumn 2025 for decision to construct. And then finally, the piece I'm going to talk to before I hand over to Chris is the future transport zone IMS revenue share. There is a ask for committee to be able to endorse a split of the revenue we get back from the mobility service, integrated mobility service, which is IMS. That's for you e-scooters, e-bikes and cargo bikes, e-cargo bikes that run around our region. The contract we have with the supplier gives the region a split of the revenue. It talks in that paper about how that will be divided up amongst unitary authorities within the region. I'll hand over to Chris for the other elements of the paper.
Thank you. Do you want to take questions on any of those items, or are you happy for me to keep going for the other elements? I'll keep going. So, okay. So, morning, councillors. The next recommendation in the paper is regarding Future for West, the mass transit system, and the proposal in this paper is to get approval for the strategic outline case, which is the first stage business case, which would, and then to note that officers will bring forward in the next committee a proposal to enable progression of the outline business case, which is where we then start developing options and an options appraisal for overground routes for a mass transit system. So this one is about getting approval for the strategic outline case to enable officers to start developing a paper. And the next paper would be seeking approval to then develop that those open outline business case options. So that's Future for West. The next recommendation is regarding the Local Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Fund, or LEVI, as it is sometimes shortened to, and you might see in the paper. This seeks to approve delegated authority for the West of England Combined Authority Strategic Director of Infrastructure with consultation of the unitary authority directors to launch a procurement for the appointment of charge point operators for the electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So to be able to then start procure operators to go and build electric vehicle infrastructure charge points in the region, nearly £3.5 million, and also to allocate 3.2 million to Bristol City Council so they can then procure and deliver charge points through their the City Leap operation that's been agreed. And then also there's some capability funding to enable the the project and programme management of this work. And then the final recommendation in the Transport Infrastructure paper is regarding the Active Travel Fund. So this is seeking delegated authority to spend a much smaller amount, £170,000 that's been secured to extend the Active Travel Fund Tranche 4 funding to do some small scale interventions on cycling, walking and wheeling in the region, and also a small amount of capability funding as well to enable that to be managed effectively. So those, I think, are all the recommendations in the Transport Infrastructure paper. Any questions?
Does any member of the committee have any questions for Chris and Malcolm on the outline that they've given us? Any further? Ben?
When we've been talking about the over-programming and the funding that's effectively been released from like the M32 project, etc., into that pot that becomes over-programming to enable you to do other things, do we have like worry beads of things that have happened in delivery that we're just not getting as a result of this money being returned to over-programming?
Thank you, Councillor. I have a whole list of worry beads, Councillor. I think I could keep the committee members here all day, but I won't. I think the takeaway we should take from it, M32 is a classic example. Firstly, we shouldn't solutionise before we understand the problem. We should definitely understand the problem before we start coming up with solutions. And secondly, and it's not unique to this combined authority, I would suggest it's most local authorities, when government asks us to bid for something at very short timescales, we would make sure what we're bidding for. Because in this case, we did a strategic outline case for £540 million, and we didn't really have the confidence and understanding that we could deliver all those outcomes in that time. So there was risk. But that is a habit, I would suggest, of central government when they're asking for bids. Some lessons to be learned.
Sorry, can I follow up on that? So if we know about those things that are now potential, release of funds and everything, is it possible to have some kind of tabulated table of these outcomes that we're no longer achieving under the current CRSTS, is it SCRTS? Anyway, that acronym, to just get a simplified list of the things that have been deferred, delayed, stopped as a result of this. So what's now going into over-programming? Is there a simple 2 or 3 page view of what that is?
Thank you, Councillor. In effect, it's the October rebaseline committee paper from last year. It gives you the new line. What has been taken out of the list? Only the M32. Really, that's the only thing that's in terms of output benefits for CRSTS ones was a park and ride scheme, which alleged to take off private vehicles off the M32. So that's the only thing that's really come off the list for CRSTS one. That may well be delivered at a later date, subject to understanding the solutions to meet the need. But for everything else, it remains the same.
Okay, thank you. So that's probably a better way for me. The language I was trying to use there is like understanding the benefits that are not being realised as a result of money being returned to over-programming. So when that does happen in the future, if we can have some just kind of very simple view, outline view of the benefits lost as a result of over-programming being picked up.
Thank you, Councillor. I think that's fairly straightforward. We can do that. There was a list within the October 22 paper about the rebaselining and what benefits were, where they were going, whether they were being maintained. Going forwards, that's fairly simple to maintain it.
Do you have any other questions? I've got a few questions, but any other questions from the committee members about the presentations or indeed anything else in the papers? Because my questions are about what's in the papers. Right. Okay. So the first question I have, which we did slightly touch on earlier on, is in relation to this structure of the delegating process. And I'm slightly perturbed to hear that the delegations have gone from 6 up to 8, because this seems to me this is where a lot of controversies happened over the last year, particularly in relation to BSIP. And it's described to be an agile and swift decision-making process, which of course is excellent. And I totally endorse the idea behind it. But it does only work if there is proper consultation with the unitary authorities, with the officers there and with the political agents, and that it's done in a timely way so that they're involved in the decisions that are made, and also in a timely way so that they are able, in relation to desirable but politically sensitive projects, to get the comms right with the members of the public before it happened. Now, I know that there are difficulties with the Bristol and Bath A4 corridor. It's amongst local people. A lot of those proposals are really, frankly, extremely unpopular, and because of the way they're coming through and at speed, there isn't time to get the comms right. You're not getting the ward councillors on board, which is not going to be helpful, and that's causing difficulties. So I would like to hear from the officers what the structure of the consultations are to make sure that that the WECA officers, in relation to these projects where they have enormous sums of money delegated towards them, £8 million, do effectively engage with the unitary authorities, their officers and their political leaders.
First, just to say that the request for an increase in the delegation came from the unitary authorities themselves.
Excellent.
Second, there is a working principle, which is that within CRSTS, where a project is in one area, that the default is that the local authority leads the project. And obviously, therefore, for both reasons, they are in charge of the way that that goes through their decision pathway process and indeed all the local consultation. One of the things that we obviously heard about just now is the M32. It's a project that didn't go ahead because the initial work demonstrated that the value for money, the cost benefits hadn't been realised, but also it was something which could not happen without political support at both ends of it. So I think in contrast to BSIP, which is what you mentioned earlier, which we don't need to go over that here now. I think CRSTS, because of the nature of the projects and the fact that the unitary authorities are also the highways authority, we are reasonably safe ground, because nothing goes ahead unless it's gone through both the decision pathway process and also meets with local, or at least the unitary authorities' political leadership's will. So it's quite a secure part of our operating environment relative to some other areas, perhaps.
That's very comforting to hear. Malcolm?
I'll pick up some other points you raised in terms of engagement.
Yeah.
We do recognise that engagement on the Bath to Bristol Strategic Corridor has been challenging, and we are setting up a suite of localised engagement forums for members of the community to get more involved in discussions. We have amended some of those designs already based on feedback, and we continue to move that further forward. Now, the delegation that's asked for in the committee paper will not change any of that within BBSC. The values are too high. The values of the combined authority delivered projects are too high to be able to fit within that delegated ask. And most of the schemes have the ability to move forwards at pace within that new delegation will be with the UAs. So it's small value in effect. I know it sounds like a big number because it's £8 million, but they are invariably going to be active travel schemes that will be falling with that delegation. The large infrastructure schemes will still need to go through a committee because of the value of the scheme.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions around that? Because it has been a controversial area in the past, Ben.
Can I just ask a clarification on when the unitary authorities requested that delegation increase?
Between the last committee meeting and the next one. It's come up over the last 3 months as we've reviewed our approach collectively to getting the CRSGS delivery working. So you might describe it as a marginal gain in the efficiency and effectiveness of our ability to get projects through. So it's since the last committee meeting, so in the last 2 or 3 months.
Any other questions from the committee on anything that we've discussed so far? So I had I went through the papers in some detail, so some odds and ends, many of which you've answered as you've gone through, which is very helpful. But one thing I particularly noticed was in relation to BSIP, which we've spent a lot of time looking at last year because it was very controversial. It would be really helpful if this committee could be sent the refresh proposal that was put together in order to have access to the next tranche of BSIP, which was published in June. It may well be on some publicly available platform, which I haven't yet found. But if you wouldn't mind sending that to the committee, I'd be very grateful, because that follows on through from the work we were doing last year.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we can certainly share that, and we certainly shared it with the chief executives and officers in unitary authority as well. But absolutely, we can share that, and it's I'm pleased to say that since the last committee, it's obviously been submitted, and we've had the funding, which then enables the BSIP to continue the funding in place for the rest of the final year of the BSIP programme. You know, we're conscious new government, there may well be changes and opportunities to engage and input into what goes beyond. But for now, it's great to have the funding in place for the current BSIP programme.
I'm grateful for that. Thank you very much indeed. Does anyone have any other questions relating to transport for Malcolm and Chris while they're here in the hot seats before I release them? Mark, you're looking hopeful.
Well, I've got a general transport question, and I suppose it is mentioned in brief. It's to do with the Henbury line. There's a discussion there, additional money being released because of security concerns or need for increased security, both Filton North and Henbury. I'm just wondering what the current state of play on that scheme actually is at the moment. Are we still looking at the 2026? Because I don't believe we've had planning permission for one of those stations yet.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm happy to answer those questions. We don't have planning consent for Henbury yet. That was so we're reapplying for our planning because of a condition on the access ramp, access to the station. And we are proposing that we press forward with an application now in the next few weeks, which will allow us to deliver that project end of 26, early 27. It's essential to bring forward Henbury as well as Filton because it provides the functionality of the train system, so that we need to look at the system approach. Filton itself, the scope requirements at Filton have been amended following the application for redensification of the site and the arena, which has changed the design. We have agreed with the rail industry partners what that revised set of requirements will be, and we'll be bringing further information to committee on that in future.
Pardon me for jumping on a comment there. So originally there was 26, and then you started mentioning 27 in your response. And I think originally this was meant to be 2021. So it has seemed to be sneaking along all the way. Are we now looking at 27, or are we actually going with the optimism bias I was talking about earlier? And will it ever happen? I'm getting slightly concerned that this will ever be forever in the distance. The quest for the Holy Grail.
It will not be forever in the distance. We're absolutely sure we have to have those facilities open, not least to which the developer on Filton need it. And we made commitments to the region to deliver it. So we are absolutely committed to deliver those. There are challenges related to Filton Station that needs to be addressed to ensure that we get the right system and the right solution for those using the station and the residents in the region to be able to use that facility, rather than deliver a station that is not fit for purpose, particularly next door to a significant arena, which will be of benefit for our region.
Just slightly concerned, Chair, that the Holy Grail gives immortality. I might require immortality to get my station.
We will do our best to scrutinise what's going on, Mark, to make sure that you are involved while you're still with us. Zoe.
It's a bit far away. I mean, you are very confident, and you keep saying that you are very sure. What do you have to back up that? Are you just saying that, or why do you believe that you're just definitely going to achieve it in time?
I'm saying it because, well, firstly, I spent 37 years doing this stuff. Secondly, as many members know, I'm actually here on secondment from Network Rail, so I've got an idea of their performance of their business. And thirdly, we have to get these solutions open, be able to support the housing development and the growth development within our region. So the two are intrinsically linked, and we are being lent on quite heavily by not only our members in the region, and quite rightly so, but also the developer who has to make a contribution towards the delivery of that outcome. So we absolutely have to get that across the line. I don't think it's open to question. We will open Ashley Down Station this year. That's likely to be opened end of August, early September. So it'd be great if we could see some of the members there supporting the delivery of that rail station. We opened Portway Park and Ride last year alongside officers in Bristol City Council, and we expect to continue that trend and have greater confidence in our capability to deliver in the region.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions from committee members for our officers? No. So, gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. We always very much appreciate the officers coming and being able to give such helpful overviews and summaries, and also to answer questions, which could be anything. And we understand that's not necessarily a comfortable seat to be sitting in, and you've done it extremely effectively today, and we're very grateful. Thank you very much. Nice to see you.
Thank you, members.
So the other subject we wanted to have an overview on today was the transformation programme and the response to the best value notice. So Rachel Pikett, welcome. Thank you very much for coming to give us an overview on this subject. And can I invite you to tell the committee what's happening and where we're at?
Yes, no problem. So I'm Rachel Pikett. I'm Head of Policy here at the Combined Authority. So as there are a number of new members today, I've been asked to do a bit of a run through of the background to where the transformation came from. So it's been in place since spring 2023 and was developed in response to a range of issues. Firstly, the external audit value for money report that was published at the back end of 2022, which set out a range of recommendations for the authority. Following that report, the authority developed its own action plan to respond to those issues that Grant Thornton had set out, and also asked Solace to undertake an independent peer review of the authority. That peer review was presented to committee in March 23, and committee asked that the recommendations of that review were taken forward. There was a degree of overlap between the recommendations in the BFM report, the action plan the authority had developed in response to that, and the independent peer review. So at June 23 committee, we presented a single transformation programme to take forward all of those actions in an integrated way. That report in June 23 set out 32 specific actions that we were going to be taking forward, and figure 1 in your paper today sets that out at a high level. It then sets out the work streams that were developed, the core actions and the aims of each area of the programme. The majority of those actions are now complete, and the paper that you've got in your pack today provides an update on next steps in relation to actions that remain open. The ongoing areas of activity largely align with the issues that were highlighted in the best value notice that the authority received in March of this year, namely supporting the strengthening of relationships between committee members, agreeing strategic priorities for the region, reviewing our constitution, and continuing to engage with government on a range of issues. To support the response, an independent improvement panel has been established, and the committee paper that you've got in your pack today sets out the membership and the terms of reference for that panel, and with the intention of that being approved by committee on Friday. Friday's committee paper also sets out a new strategic framework for the region, setting long-term strategic priorities that can support decision-making over the years ahead, and is another of the actions that was highlighted in the best value notice. And the paper also provides an update on work that's been going on to consider how the authority can mature its approach to investment, and asks committee to endorse the continuation of that work. In terms of background, the audit committee paper that was considered last week sets this out in greater context. I'm conscious that the paper that you've got today is a kind of next steps, and it is one of a sequence of reports that's been developed over the last year. The audit committee paper from last week kind of set it out in context, kind of where's everything come from, how do all the actions fit together. So if it's useful, we can circulate that paper to this committee as well.
If you could, Rachel, that would be great. Yes,
no
please.
problem. And I will leave it there. Happy to take questions on any of the issues in the paper.
Thank you, Rachel. A lot of information packed there into a very concise summary. This has been a very important piece of work that the Combined Authority has been undergoing for the last couple of years. Do committee members have any questions for Rachel on this subject? No, well, I do. So, yeah, thankfully. Thank you, Rachel. One of the things that the Scrutiny Committee, I think, will be interested in is its liaising or contact with the independent panel. I know they've had one informal meeting back in June. And do you know when the date of the first formal meeting is, or has that been fixed yet?
It's not been formally fixed, but I believe it's going to be in the first week of September.
Okay, thank you, thank you. And I've seen that in the papers, it's anticipated that those meetings will be attended by the leaders of the union authorities or their substitutes, and that it's possible for that panel to decide to invite other parties. Scrutiny is not, and for that matter, audit, not yet listed in as a potential invitee. And I do see that the Scrutiny Committee will have public reports of the works of the panel, but obviously they won't be aware of the thinking and the discussions behind it unless they attended the meeting. And that there is, it is contemplated that there will be a liaison between panel members and scrutiny. So really this is a very long-winded question. What I'd like to know is what practical measures are going to be taken to make sure that scrutiny will have effective and useful contact with the independent panel.
So as noted in the paper, there will be an update to each committee meeting on the work of the panel. And obviously, as scrutiny looks at those papers in advance of each committee meeting, there'll be an opportunity for scrutiny to consider those issues. We can talk to the chair of the panel about informal contact as well, and what opportunities there might be to liaise with members outside of this forum as well, if that'd be helpful.
Yes, that would be very helpful, because I think that would be very useful. They are going to be doing some very important work, and it's a lot of the subjects they'll be looking at are matters that scrutiny have been looking at for a considerable period. And in particular, they will, as I understand it, be engaging in the review of the Constitution. Now, this is something that we've been talking about a lot in scrutiny over the last year, the Constitution being perhaps not as effective as it could be for an institution which is growing exponentially as this one is, and certainly with the previous regime, the interim CEO and monitoring officer, it had been contemplated that certainly the chairs of scrutiny and through them the committees of scrutiny and audit would be involved in the work on the Constitution. So it would be nice to know that we will still be involved, and that it's going to be done in an effective and coordinated way, rather than lots of little patchy meetings going on. Well, not patchy, I'm sure, very effective meetings in lots of different places. But I see that Stephen has indicated he would like to speak on this.
Yes, Chair. Obviously, the Constitution is one of those items in the best value notice, and there's been previous discussion, I know, in previous audit and oversight overview and scrutiny about that. I think it's fair to say my initial informal conversations with the chair designate of the improvement panel, she shares my view, which is we need to ensure that we're clear about the priority order in which we do the work. Because the most important thing, I think, is that we understand our purpose, and then we can work collaboratively together through our political leaders and officers to ensure that we can, frankly, not frustrate our own ambitions. The Constitution, in effect, should be in the service of those things. And so I think she feels that yes, it's an important piece of work, but it needs to follow on from what we're here for and what we're trying to achieve. So I think, once we get into that, absolutely, the Constitution needs to come through the relevant scrutinies, and we want the informal and formal to take place. And one other thing just to note, and it's obvious, but again, it's for those who are really, really keen, you'll have seen it in the Labour manifesto, but it's been referred to since. And that is the reference to making sure that regional mayors will be able to work effectively to deliver whatever the programme is. So we expect some changes along with the references in the King's Speech, the devolution bill. We expect to have a conversation about those changes. So my tidy mind says we really only want to do this once. So my suspicion is that those ideas and those suggestions that government is right now working on, which some of us have been involved in since the election, will come down the track in quite a useful timescale for us. So we'll be able to incorporate that thinking too in the work we do on the Constitution. I hope that's helpful.
That's very helpful. Does any member of the committee have any questions on that particular subject while we've just been discussing it? No. One of the other matters that's mentioned in the report is the results of the SOLAS independent peer review 1 year on. And some of us were interviewed as part of that process, and the results are coming out in September. So I did have one plea, which is that could that at least be provided to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee in good time, and not 1 day's working notice, as that is a separate matter. It would be very helpful to have sight of that to give us time to sort of see where that has got to. independently from the reports that go to the next committee meeting. Thank you. Any other questions on the transformation programme and best value notice? I think this is very much work in progress, and no doubt there will be developments through the new government regime and the focus on devolution in any event. So I think all of us just need to be keep well informed on what's happening, and we look forward to liaising with you about that. So Toby.
I've got a couple of specific questions on the progress on the actions on the transformation programme. First one is about the strengthening of the forward plan, and we touched on this slightly earlier. It says in the report that the forward plan is now complete for the next 12 months and the action can be closed. But I think many of us on the committee would agree that the forward plan is still quite light. Is it a bit premature to be saying that action is now closed?
So I think in terms of a number of the actions that are closed, the intention is not that they're closed and job done. It's they are closed because the appropriate arrangements are now in place to transfer them back to business as usual management arrangements. So there is now a 12-month forward plan in place, which is a step forward from where we were and why it's been considered that we could move it back to business as usual. Absolutely, the kind of level of detail within that forward plan is something that we'll continue to be working on to ensure that we can give people as much visibility as possible on when key decisions are coming through. So work continues, but transformation activity isn't needed in quite the same way.
Okay, thank you. Second question on the approach to business cases. Again, looking at the way that action has been addressed, I'm only going by what I can read here, and I'm not fully familiar with the whole background of this, so please forgive me if I've missed something. But the progress on the action seems to refer really to small organisations and businesses applying for grants. Whereas my feeling was that the authorities' approach to business cases needed to be reviewed a bit more generally than that. And again, the action is being considered closed based on making some improvements that allow small community organisations, etc., to apply for grants, which is great. But has there been a sort of benchmarking of the authorities' wider business case process against other combined authorities, for example? And when looking at the larger schemes that, it's the unitary authorities applying and producing business cases. Thanks.
So yes, the specific action that we were asked to look at was around improving access to information, improving the ability of smaller organisations to be able to understand how to access funds and do that in a light touch way, and to improve the transparency of information available on our website, so that the information about funding routes was clear. So with that action complete, we've closed the action. The broader point around larger business cases, etc., is subject to continuous ongoing work around how do we strengthen our processes, etc. So that's work that we are still continuing to look at, but wasn't the kind of the focus of the transformation activity.
Thank you, Toby, and thank you, Rachel. Are there any other questions for Rachel on this issue? So can I thank Rachel for a very succinct and clear summary? That's incredibly helpful. Thank you very much. And also for coming along and being prepared to answer questions. And again, we're very grateful to officers for being prepared to come along and put themselves in the firing line. And you answered all those questions very clearly, and we're very grateful. Thank you. So are there any other matters in the joint and combined committee papers that any members of this committee wants to raise, discuss, ask questions of, or are we happy to move on to the next item? So I'm assuming that means that there are no further questions. So thank you very much indeed, everybody. Which takes us on to item 10, which is the overview and scrutiny work programme. Now I've got some general comments I want to make about this, but I know that Stephen wants to talk about the forward plan, and as a lot of the programme is going to be based around the forward plan, I would like to invite him to address us on that now, please.
Thanks, Chair. It was merely in the context of your question. I think Councillor Weston, you remember, we used to talk about the forward plan in our previous roles, upon occasions, and I think it is a good indicator of a number of things. And from my perspective, whilst I agree with Rachel, it's moved from, in effect, something where we needed to get out of a transformation action into business as usual. I think we need to do a lot more. We need to go a lot further. It's something which I would actually really appreciate a conversation through this committee, both formally and informally on. Obviously, when you frame your work plan, you want to do so against a real sense of what's coming down the track. Likewise, I would like to think that I'm clear, what my officers are going to be doing in a year's time. We've got quite a lot of that, but I don't think we've got quite enough. And I think with a new government asking us to produce a growth plan, with a with a gateway review coming up, as we've just been discussing, CRSTS and all these exciting transport projects, I'd like us all to be, as it were, fighting each other off, because there's so much content that we're all trying to discuss, either through the scrutiny opportunities you have, or by reference to a very chock-a-block forward plan. So I'm just putting it out there as an invitation, really, and I think it will be a good, healthy discussion to have, if not all today, certainly on an ongoing basis. And I will be encouraging officers and committee members, and of course the mayor, to engage in that conversation, probably mostly off camera, but to ensure we do have a really full list, because as you see, MCAs are having a bit of a moment around the country, so we ought to be really busy, and we are, but not all that translates into a forward plan at the moment.
Does anyone have any questions on the forward plan for Stephen, or points they'd like to make on that specific matter? Mark.
Thank you, Chair. It's actually just linking to a comment you made earlier. When we're talking about the forward plan, we're talking about the reports we get. It's all great to have 1,000 pages to read, 4 or 5 days before. But things like we're hearing today about the, I can't even use the anagram, CRSTS. Yeah, I got it. Excellent. Okay, marvelous. Alphabet soup. It would actually almost be good if we were able to have, off camera, on Teams, whatever, a briefing as to the components that are part of it and what they actually do, what the purpose of it is. So what is the M32? What is the Yates spur? What is all this? So we actually understand it. We probably all know fairly well the bits happening in our council area, certainly the bits happen in our council area around us. But once we start to stretch from the, if you're a councillor up in Yates, you might not know everything that's going on in Bath. But actually we're being asked to scrutinise it. And I just think that briefings for us that we can put in place, linked to that forward plan, linked to the big ticket items that are being paid for by the combined authority, would be very helpful. So sort of along the side of running of our work programme and the forward plan is to have those Teams briefings and we can just work out what the hell we're doing.
Yes, thank you, Mark. And Stephen's indicated that he is very happy to do those. And on our induction meeting, I did also suggest that we might try and organise actually physical site visits for some of these projects, because there isn't, I know, so that we'd actually do understand, that especially for we've got 3 unitary authorities mostly, and a big area. And as you say, you didn't know what the spur was in Yates, whatever it was. I mean, and many of us won't be familiar with the Temple Quarter work or where it is. Obviously, it needs to be related to the forward plan to make sure that we're being effective. But I would. I think what we're being asked to do today, just so that we're clear, is to agree that we organise an informal meeting with the relevant officers and with Stephen's assistants to work out how to make this next year effective, and actually how Scrutiny is going to operate as a committee to make sure that we are properly informed. And what I would like to do is meet every member of the committee individually, over a cup of coffee or by Teams or whatever works, to sort of find out what your interests are, sort of in terms of your expertise and the areas that you would particularly like to focus on, because I suspect that to have every member of the committee fully informed on every single project is a bit of an ask. All of us have other day jobs and or councillor duties. So I'd like to see whether we could get people to, if you like, own particular areas, because that would be very helpful. But we all need to be aware of the big projects and to understand them. So I think a sort of physical site visits on the really big ones, and then briefings in line with the forward plan on the big ticket subjects. So we've got the transport sort of area and we've got the business and skills area. One of the other big subjects is LEP. I have up to now been a little hazy on LEP, and I would like the haze to clear. So I think some clarification and training on that would be very helpful. Obviously, the transformation programme is something that is going to be going on in parallel with our work all year, so we need to keep an eye on that. And what we also need to remember to do is that we must throughout remember that the environmental and climate impact must be embedded into all these projects as we go along, and to be properly informed about how that's happening and how that works in tune. So we had last year, we had a deep dive into BSIP, which is very helpful because that was quite technical, and there was a lot of history and there was a lot of drama and heat and light being produced around BSIP. So that was very useful. But we also had a series of presentations from the environmental officers on their particular areas, and that made it was very helpful to find out how those environmental issues were being embedded within projects and or were happening as standalone matters. So we can have some general discussion now, but I think the work on this will happen in an informal meeting, which will happen, and I would like this to happen soon. I don't want to put this off till September. I'd like to hit the ground running in September. We've got the next meeting in September. There'll be many more hundreds of pages landing at that point. So we can do it by teams, it seems to me, to have a sort of a working party. Certainly, Jerome, I'm sure, will want to be involved, and any councillor who would like to be involved with that, please let us know, me know, Jerome know, and Jill know, and we will make sure that we do arrange a meeting that anybody who's interested can attend. But it seems to me that's what, as Stephen outlined, we need to do it in liaison with the formal plan. But there are big subjects like all of these transport things that we need to be properly appraised of, so that we can be effective. And the other thing is to say that we discussed this a lot at the beginning of last year, and we sort of started getting there. But this is an oversight and scrutiny committee. Scrutiny is calling decisions in that people aren't happy with after they've been made. Oversight is being part of the planning and making sure that the planning and the preparation and the work that's going on prior to decisions being made is effective and is working well with the unitary authorities and so on. And it seems to me this work plan should be focusing a lot on oversight to make sure that a lot of these issues are resolved, so that we don't have to do call-ins, because we've had all those discussions well in advance, which should be a much more harmonious and effective way to work. So would anybody like to say anything about particular things they would like to be addressed at this work planning meeting? Jerome.
Thank you. I mean, first of all, I think that sort of taking the approach of how do we make ourselves effective for the next year is absolutely the right way of dealing with, clarifying these strategic issues. But there's a danger in just focusing on the forward plan. The forward plan is one leg of the stool of what I would call an effective, policy and strategic management framework. And, within that, we've got the forward plan, we've got the organisational structure, we've got the financial framework, we've got the policy framework, and I think, as Mark was saying, what are our current key activities? So, we don't need to dive into a lot of detail on each of these, but we do need to have a sense of this kind of jigsaw fitting together. And it's really nice to have that sense of how do we make ourselves effective as a scrutiny committee for the next year, because any one of those areas you could go into some very deep rabbit holes. So yeah, I think just seconding the approach really.
That's very helpful, Jerome. Thank you, David.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on the scope, because I think last year there was a tendency to over-focus on buses and transport. I think simply because that's where most of our casework seems to come from, but it is not the entirety of the work of WECA, and I think I've got to personally think we should spend some time looking at other areas as well. And I take your point, particularly about skills. I think that's something that's really important going forward, and I would like us to spend some time looking at the skills side of things as well.
Thank you, David. That's very helpful. I know you've expressed that view before, and I've had a rather frustrating first year, and that never happened. But let's make sure it does happen this year. Stephen, is there anything you would like to say about this item?
I would just like to point. I mean, I know you are all aware of this, but clearly you're not scrutinising as ward councillors in your own authorities. So I just want to make that point, that you're here to help us become a better sovereign organisation. Beyond that, I think it's really important, and I think it's great timing, isn't it? I feel that at the moment. I may live to regret that, so having said that, but it does feel like a really interesting and exciting moment for this organisation, as it is for all, I'm sure, all mayoral combined authorities. So we mustn't lose the emphasis on sustainable economic growth. And obviously I put the word sustainable in front of it because I think it needs to always be put into the right context. But we have been positioned by the new government as in the vanguard of driving growth and productivity. So as a commission looking at us, as you say, oversight and scrutiny, I think that's something I'd hope you'd be very interested in, which is what are we actually doing to address some of those challenges and unlock some of those opportunities for our region that are going to make sure that not only can we deliver for the citizens, but also how does government then see us as a bankable partner to attract more investment for our patch. So I hope we can. I'm absolutely agreeing with Councillor Addison that we need to lift our eyes a bit and not get stuck, to Councillor Thomas' point, in some rabbit holes. There's also that much bigger point, which is this is a changing landscape. We've got to stay with what's happening nationally and ensure this organisation is fit to take opportunities.
Well, that all sounds wonderfully aspirational and excellent, and we look forward to being part of the journey. To use that horrible word, Zoe.
Thank you. So on that note, obviously we need to have a forward plan so that we know the structure that we're working to for the next year and so forth. But we do have a change in national administration, and something that I am concerned about is perhaps that we create, this bulletproof forward plan and then everything has to be rejigged because the way that the devolution or whatever's going on nationally means that we have to work in different ways and we have to start from scratch. So I think there's a need for us to both have, a forward plan that we can stick to, but we also need to make sure there's room for us to be adaptable in it.
I think one of the ways to do that is to keep a slot, in the diary for things that we know you'll want to look into to do with the changing landscape. We don't know yet, do we? But we do know there's going to be some form of fiscal event, as they say, and we are being asked to feed into it. So whenever it's your next meeting, September. That's quite early, but I would have thought that you would want to have something in there around, to your point, making sure we don't get left behind. I mean, we'll have an open channel, so you'll know what's happening. But I would thought give yourself some headroom in your diary, in your calendar, because there will be slots that we probably will want to fill with that changing landscape.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for your question, Zoe. Does anybody else have any questions or points that they would like to make on this subject? Toby.
I think so. I appreciate the points about focusing on more than just transport, for sure. Personally, I am very interested in transport. I do think the CRSTS programme that we've been discussing a lot today is going to need to be something that we really go into a deep dive onto. It's so critical. It's so important for the region, and we absolutely have to get it right. And I think it's just looking at that in a slightly different focus to some of the other things we'll be looking at. So with CRSTS, it's short term. It's now getting to the point where it's happening. So we're not more going to be talking about the what and the when, and just making sure that that's all happening in accordance with the right priorities. And then in these other areas that the combined authority is growing into, it's more about the how and the why and the slightly more nebulous at this point, but let's make it a bit less nebulous over the coming months.
Thank you. Lucy.
Yes, I would agree with Councillor Wells on that CRSTS is really one for a deep dive. There's sums involved and the opportunities to deliver.
Thank you, but don't worry, David, we won't forget about business and skills. Any other questions or points on this subject? Well, then, from a practical point of view, Jill and Mark in Democratic Services will be circulating emails asking for availability for a Teams meeting to discuss this. If you would like to be involved, please say so. And if you don't respond, we will organise it according to our convenience and not yours. So there's your incentive. And I would like to get this done before everyone disappears for the summer holidays. It seems to me we really only need half an hour, maybe an hour max. We should be able to do this, before we all disappear, and indeed from where we're disappearing potentially as well. So that's my message to Jill, which she will hear and we will discuss after this meeting. So that leaves me to say thank you very much, everybody, for coming. There are two things. One is that we have the slot to give comments to the Joint Committee and the Combined Committee on Friday. So I will write some comments and circulate them. But if there's anything you would particularly like to be included, please let me know in advance. I'm not writing it loads of times. Just pop me through an email or pick up the phone, and I'll make sure that my sort of general sort of tranche is going to be it's new broom, new brooms, new opportunities, lots going on. We want to support. But please remember all the difficulties we've had in the past, and we know they're being addressed, and we watch improvement with interest, will be the general drift. But what I would like to say right now is thank you very much for coming. And I can confirm that having done a year of this so far, this is a much livelier, better informed, inquisitive committee than we've had so far. And not being insulting to all those who've come before, who did excellent work. Thank you to you all. But this has been, given that it's the first committee and you're not familiar with the sort of how this works and the production of the paperwork, you've all come along much better armed, and we've had much more interesting discussions. So thank you very much. It promises to be an effective and useful scrutiny year, I feel. So thank you, everybody. And unless there is anything else that anybody wants to raise, I close the meeting. Sorry, Toby, Mark, sorry, Mark. No, Mark's trying to sort of launch. Right, so we ignore Mark launching and say thank you very much, everybody, and see you in September. Thank you.